Hi, everybody, and welcome to the LinkedIn Live this morning. I'm really excited to be talking about, and something that causes us so much grief and pain, is this notion of having great salespeople, people that perhaps come in as great salespeople, but more often than not, we bring in somebody that's got a lot of potential. We spend quite a lot of time and energy with them. We make sure that we get them some coaching, we give them lots of feedback, and their numbers start to go up, and so does the performance of your business. And over the years, that person, improves and improves, and then only to find out all of a sudden that they've resigned. And you are a little bit heartbroken as a manager or a leader in that business or as an entrepreneur, and you are wondering what you could have done differently. And so I wanted to start today and this morning session talking to you about Mark. Mark, I was hired by the organisation to mentor him a few months ago. And he was their top sales performer. And so one of the things that the organisation wanted to do was to be able to retain him. But they felt that he was a little bit unhappy, and they wanted to make sure that perhaps the mentoring support would help him clarify what obstacles that he's got in his life and his mind, helped him shift his mindset so that they could keep him longer. Now, they knew that they may not be able to have him forever, but they were hoping that they could maybe have him for another 3 years or so. In conversations with Mark, one of the things that became very evident was that he, in his mind, was starting to think, well, I've been with this organisation for about 3 years now, and is it time to leave? Often when people get to an anniversary, perhaps not at the first year, but certainly once people get to their second year anniversary, 3 years, 5, 10, those bigger milestones are definitely times where we start to reflect and wonder whether it's time that we moved on and did something else. And even if we are quite happy, but Mark certainly was wondering whether, he wasn't fully satisfied with that. So I said, well, let's park the anniversaries and let's actually have more of a conversation about what it is that's missing, what it is. And I said, look, I know I'm hired to help you, but my job isn't to make you stay there. My job is just to help you get clear about who you are and what your needs are, what your goals are, so that you can be in alignment with what you are trying to achieve. And in the conversations I had with him, it was really evident that he wanted to have more satisfaction with his work. And when we dive deeper into what was causing him dissatisfaction, a lot of the dissatisfaction was directly related to his particular manager. He felt that when there were things that were going well, he was often praised in front of his peers. He was also praised in front of some of the teams underneath. He was asked to come and present to the executive, and he felt like he was a bit on top of the world. So he was asked to share stories about how he'd won certain deals, what the strategies that he'd implemented, and he felt like he was really valued and he mattered, and that he was able to share some of his successes with also some of his peers that might also be able to adopt his strategies. However, he felt that when things didn't go well, and they measured their sales on a month-by-month basis, and that if he was, even a couple of percent or 5% under target, despite having well exceeded the targets in previous months, that he was sort of put down a little bit in that meeting. And, Mark didn't so well this month. And, but, I'm sure he'll pick up, like even those sort of comments, which don't seem to be that offensive, but for somebody that's a high performer, it was quite embarrassing in front of his peers. He felt that also that perhaps some of the previous conversations and previous months of data didn't count for anything. And it was like, he felt like he was a bit of a newbie. So one of the things I encouraged Mark to do was to go and have a conversation with his manager, that it's important to at least, irrespective of the outcome of that conversation, just at least raise that with his manager to say, hey, when you say this is kind of what I feel. Now, I'm not suggesting you ignore the fact that I'm below target, because I know you don't do that for others, but I'm just wondering if it could be a bit more balanced. Or, I've also got some bigger accounts, and one of those big accounts don't come through, then obviously my numbers end up being down, or I end up, far exceeding. So he had this great conversation with his manager. I was really proud that he had the courage to be able to do so. However, his manager had agreed to doing many things, but that behaviour continued. And a few months after I'd finished working with Mark, he resigned and took a role. He rang me and let me know about it. But one of the things that happened was he felt that his self-esteem had really taken a bit of a battering, and he was hoping that the new work and the new business that he was going into would be a lot more conducive to what he was trying to create. So, we have these great people, but there are things going in their mind, and that's often the reasons that some of them are starting to not perform or seem unhappy. And if you are not aware of any of those things and you find that in that organization, one of the things that happens is that they leave and you actually don't even know about the fact that they have applied for roles, and there's no opportunity then to be able to talk into getting them back. So I wanted to share some tips with you, one of them obviously in terms of feedback and how you may be able to retain some of your good people. So the first one is getting input. Great people generally, but certainly great salespeople love when you get input from them. And that input might be a new product or a new service or a new strategy you're trying to implement. And you want to kind of road test that as a manager or leader, and you want to be able to run that by some of your people. So you might, with somebody like Mark, let's just stick to that example for a moment, be able to say, hey, Mark, can you keep this to yourself? We are looking at this, bringing this out in the next quarter. I would love your feedback on it. Here it is. What do you think? And so getting their feedback on something that you might be coming up with is great. Equally, getting their feedback and getting their input into something that perhaps is not working. Look, we've tried this for the last few months. It hasn't worked. Would love your input in terms of why it's not working. Now, they may or may not have the right answers, but to be asked and to be engaged in that process and knowing that they are a high performer and that their value and their input counts is a really great way of engaging and also then longer term being able to retain them. The other is great salespeople obviously need training, and they might already be a high performer, but despite them being a high performer, they want to continue to be a high performer. So how do we continue to keep them engaged? And one way to do that is to keep retraining them. And one of the things I always say is, let's say somebody is on, $50,000. Often organizations will have up to 4 or 5% of their salary as a budget in terms of their development and their training. And so if you've got a high salesperson, let's say that they're on $100,000, and that may be a little bit more than what you paid, it might be a bit less, but let's just call that number for the sake of doing that. So their development that you've put aside for them in your budget, maybe say 5% of that is $5,000, or whatever the equivalent is on their salary. Rather than send them to one program which costs you $5,000, it's always better to spread that out and see if you can come up with a number of courses that they want to do, some events that they could attend, where they're actually meeting some people, and it might be further study or further education, and spread that out. And if people say to me, well, how do you spread that out? I say, well, divide it over a quarter. Let's see if you can send them to something every quarter on average, and continue to retrain them, continue to invest in them, talk to them about what they do. And it might also be, in Mark's case, some mentoring or some guidance, or it may be, so give them things that's going to really help them create and improve and stay at that top level in terms of what occurs as well. The third part is incentives, and there's a lot of teams and organisations that do this part well, but there's a lot of people that don't. Incentives are usually when you take a base and you say, look, this will be the base, particularly if they're more of a commission-based salesperson, and for any increase that you get on that there'll be a percentage of that incentive that will be shared on the increase in revenue or that profit around that. That's a great way to do that, but one of the key things there is become very, very clear what the incentive is and how it works. Some people have great incentives, but they're often very complicated for salespeople. And what you want to do is just to make it really clear. The best ones that I've seen and the conversations that I've had with some of the leaders is where there's almost a bit of a step approach. So they have a base, but if they excel that, there's another benefit that they can get. And if they do that, there's an extraordinary benefit that they can get. And again, they don't all have to be monetary, but let's just stick to the monetary parts at the moment in terms of how we do that. The other incentive for great salespeople is to give them praise. Keep giving them feedback and praise where praise is due, not to make that up, But to be able to give them that praise and to be able to give them that feedback is really important, and constant feedback in terms of how that works. And on that note, when we're giving that feedback, it's really important for all your people, but particularly your very key people and the ones that you really want to retain, that you know do so much of the work in your own businesses, is not to be able to blame them. When your sales are down, get that input from that salesperson. Don't say, well, because you didn't reach target, this is what happens. Ask some questions. What could have been done better? Ask them for what they would do as a plan to move forward, and maybe then ask them the question, what you could do as a manager to be able to support them in terms of being able to make that happen. So just don't blame, solve the problem, go a bit deeper, delve into what might be happening. It may be something that the salesperson needs to do better, but it might be something that the organisation shifts, or it could be an offering that needs to shift. But just stay away from that blame when things aren't going so well. The next tip is don't assume. And what I mean by that is if their productivity is falling off, one of the things I've experienced in my own businesses with employees, and I come across a lot of leaders that are experiencing this, sometimes we think people are just slacking off. Sometimes people are just not producing enough work, and we start to get really upset about the fact that they are not pulling their weight, doing their job, and just because they think they're a great sales and a top performer, they're not putting in as much effort. There is often so many other things going on for people, especially as we've navigated and continue to navigate through the pandemic, that people are stressed. People's resilience is down. And there may be a sickness issue happening. There may be a children issue happening. In case of one of the women that I was mentoring, there was a real gap in understanding in terms of the sickness and time off she was taking. And she felt a bit uncomfortable because she was a great sales performer, to be able to say to her manager, look, I've just got so many things going on in my personal life. My sister's going through a divorce and I'm supporting her and her children because my sister works full time. I've got kindergarten issues for my own children, et cetera, et cetera. And there was so many things going on in her head that she just took some time out to be able to support that. And the manager was assuming in that case that, again, she wasn't pulling her weight and not putting as much effort in as she used to. So just that transparency in conversation by not assuming can also clear a lot of things up. Salespeople also love autonomy. So my next tip is really about, that doesn't mean that they don't have any boundaries, but you get very clear about your boundaries, your delegation of authority, how much money they're allowed to spend, what offers can they do, perhaps what discounts they can offer to some of the clients. You get very clear about the boundaries within what they're allowed to operate in, but becoming really clear in what those boundaries are. And perhaps as they become better salespeople and top performers, and they're working with bigger clients and bigger budgets and, adding more to the bottom line in the business, then how could you perhaps give them a little bit more autonomy and let them play within that autonomy and don't micromanage them? You might need to look at your numbers, but do that a little bit differently. I was speaking to somebody the other day that's finding that they've got a new salesperson. This person's got a lot of potential and has been a high performer in many other organizations, but now they've just hired this person. And they felt that they're giving them so much input, they're catching up with them 4 times a week. So there's only one day in the week that they're not seeing them and doing the numbers. And my question to them was, have you actually asked whether those 4 meetings are working for the salesperson? And they said to me, no, I haven't. So I encouraged them to go and have that conversation with that salesperson. The salesperson felt that it was too much, that they weren't trusted, and they felt that they were being micromanaged, and they didn't, I guess, feel that they had enough autonomy. And so they said, look, I've worked at very high levels. I know that you need to understand the numbers, but for me, 2 meetings would be great. Perhaps we could talk a bit about how I'm going and the personal side of it, and to have 2 separate meetings about that. And then the salesperson suggested that the other ones purely on numbers and KPIs, and whether they were measuring those, and then actually be able to have that conversation around that. So salespeople love autonomy and being able to have that space. And the last one, which is a biggie, and I will bring this up in many other LinkedIn Lives, is that I think it is so important for managers to learn how to be mentors. When managers learn how to be mentors, one of the things that happens is they ask better questions. they start to move away from constantly managing to be able to mentoring, especially your high performers. So high performers love to be able to solve their own problems, but have somebody who's almost guiding them, asking them the right questions and coming up with that right sounding board in that. One of the things we have to remember in our current economy is if we have unhappy clients, if we have unhappy employees, that has a huge impact on our business. Now, that business may be one with 50 people, it may be one with 5,000 people, or bigger or smaller. But one of the things we have to learn how to do is we have to learn how to really manage our top performers. When our top performers leave, in the case like Mark did, and I've now spoken to their leader, they are very, very distraught. They don't really have somebody in their business right now that could step up to Mark's level. And we spoke about the cost of non-retention, not from a point of making them feel even worse, but it was really to be able to say, what would the true cost be to replace somebody like Mark? And how do we actually learn from that experience now that it's too late and he's left the organisation, and ensure that we don't keep repeating that mistake with some of your future salespeople? So I hope that one of these tips helped you. If you've got any questions, I'm always available. My website is called Ask Shivani. Please DM me or go on to askshivani.com and be able to get onto the contact form. If I can answer any questions around how to create more happy employees, I'd be delighted in doing so. And I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope that that was helpful. Thanks for listening.